Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar. Welcome to our 10th webinar under the banner One on Education. It's absolutely wonderful to see so many of you with us at this event. I'm Priya Arun, editor ELT Orient BlackSwan. We are delighted and privileged to introduce our speaker for the day, Mr. Scott Thornbury. Scott Thornbury is a writer on language and methodology with far-reaching impact on the way the English language is taught in classrooms across the world. Often described as a teacher of teachers, he has taught and trained in Egypt, UK, Spain, and in his native New Zealand, and inspired teachers and ELT practitioners through innumerable webinars, conference presentations, plenaries, and blogs. His publications include several award-winning books for teachers. Some of the resources the Orient BlackSwan ELT publishing team swears by are Teaching Unplugged, Dogma in English Language Teaching, How to Teach Speaking, How to Teach Vocabulary, Natural Grammar, Uncovering Grammar, How to Teach Grammar, and 30 language teaching methods. These are only a selection of his best. He is also the series editor for the Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers and a trustee for the Hands Up project, which promotes drama activities in English for children in under-resourced regions of the Arab world. At present, he is working for the Mosaic Foundation, training teachers of refugees in the Middle East in how to integrate communicative activities into their online classes. In this webinar, his second for Orient BlackSwan ONE, he will show how ideal short texts are for classroom use, how each word in a text opens a little window into the language, and how texts can be exploited for their often hidden linguistic and textual features. Unpacking texts is also good preparation for independent reading and listening and for language production in the form of speaking and writing. Thank you, Mr. Thornbury, for so readily accepting our invitation to speak, and over to you for your much-awaited session, Unpacking a Text.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you, Orient BlackSwan, for the second opportunity to speak to teachers in the subcontinent and beyond. I'm speaking to you from Spain, and I'm going to share my screen and show you the presentation. And let's get going, because I've got quite a lot to get through, and we're going to have 10 minutes at the end, hopefully, for your questions. So post those into the question and answer box for collection. So my topic is text, and I'm going to start with a text about text. This comes from a book that's been around for quite some time now, but it captures, I think, quite clearly the principle on which this talk is based, that language always happens as text. Language always happens as text, both spoken and written text, but text, not as isolated words and sentences. From an aesthetic, social, or educational perspective, it is the text which is the significant unit of language. That is to say, it is not words or sentences that are the significant units of language, but text. Language always happens as text. But of course, when we teach language, traditionally at least, we teach words and sentences, and we tend to think that text will take care of themselves. I'm disputing that view, and I want to have a look at ways that text can be central to a methodology. Text both as the starting point and the end point of any teaching sequence. So for example, if that represents a text, we can start with the text, Then we can home in on parts of the text, and then we can pull back again and produce a similar kind of text. That's the kind of pedagogical sequence that I'll be looking at today. So we're going to start with, well, and let me just explain the title. I've called it Unpacking a Text, because I think there's a lot in a text, even a short text, and a pedagogical sequence, a teaching sequence that I'm promoting here looks at taking the text apart, layer by layer. In fact, it might be better to think of a text like an onion, yeah, an onion with its different layers. So we start off taking out the outer layer, then the next layer, then the next layer. What really could be thought of or called unpeeling a text rather than unpacking a text. So let's take a text. Here is a text. I'll give you a minute to read that. Okay, so this is an authentic text. I want you to tell me or think, don't tell me, we don't have time to, I go to answer all your questions. There's so many of you, but what is it? What is it? What kind of text is it? And to make it clearer, I can show you how it looked, well, in a minute, how it looked originally. That's the original photo of the text as I found it. So what is it? Well, clearly it's some kind of public notice. Now, where is it? Where did I find it? Those of you who know London or of London will recognize some of these place names: Covent Garden, Leicester Square, Holborn. And of course, it's it's about the underground system in London. And there is Covent Garden Underground Station. So I found it at a station, yeah, when I was on the underground in London, contemplating going to Covent Garden. Who is it addressed to? Well, clearly it's addressed to travelers on the underground, yeah? It's addressed to commuters, it's addressed to tourists, it's addressed to anybody who's using the underground. Who is it from? Well, again, it's not from anybody we know by name. It's from somebody, some official in the London Underground system. It's an anonymous notice, but it is, in a sense, authorized by the London Underground system. How is it communicated? Well, obviously, it's a written text. So it's communicated in writing and in print writing, not digital writing. And you notice that there's two parts to the text. There's a problem and there's a solution. So that's how the message is communicated: a problem and a solution. And why? What's the purpose of the text? Is it to prohibit? Is it to recommend? Is it to suggest? Is it to, well, I think it's fairly obvious that it's advice, yeah? The function of the text is advice. So what we've been looking, with these questions, we've been looking at the outer layer of the onion, as it were. These questions which position the text and its purpose. And we can see that these questions can relate to any text we find, any text. The technical words that answer these questions are the what of the text, that it's a notice, is what's called its genre, the text type, if you like. Where the text is situated, or where it was originally situated, is its context or its context of situation. The who to and the who from are the participants in this communicative exchange, the person who wrote the text, the person who is written to. The how we can call the mode, whether it's written or spoken. If it's written, is it digital, is it print, and so on. And also the structure. And finally, the why of the text is its function, its purpose. As I say, so any text can answer those questions. We can ask those questions about any text, any authentic text anyway. So let's take another layer of the onion off and now go into a little bit more detail about this text. So there's the text again. Here's some questions. Can you remember the answer? When does Covent Garden Station get busy? How far is Holborn Station in minutes? Which is further, Holborn or Leicester Square? And what's to stop you getting lost? So these are questions that you recognize as teachers. These are kind of comprehension questions. They go a little bit deeper into the text because it's extremely important if you're using a text in class that the learners understand the text. Reading the text aloud is not proof, it's not evidence that the learners understand the text. Listening to the text read aloud is not proof that the learners understand the text. The only way we can get at understanding is by setting some kind of task, traditionally like questions, or it could be like this, using some kind of visual. If you're at Euston Station, what's the best way to avoid Covent Garden? So using the information from the text, using this map to answer these two questions. So that's the second layer, if you like, of the onion. Yeah, we've unpacked the outer layer, which was these 5 questions. Yeah, what kind of text, who, why, where, etc. Now we're looking at the text in more detail to check the understanding of the text. Now we can go in even further and look at the language in the text. So here's the text again. We mentioned before that it's a problem solution kind of text. Can you find words in the text associated with problems? Words in the text associated with problems. Words that have negative connotations. Busy, very busy, exactly. Not a good thing, busy, yes. Any other words? Yeah, okay, avoid implies there's a problem, exactly. Crowds is a problem. Crowds is a problem, especially nowadays. Crowds is a big problem. Okay, so what about words associated with solutions? Words associated with solutions, words which have a positive connotation. Short, exactly. Who wants a long walk? Short, clearly signposted, exactly. Avoid the crowds, exactly. So we have a clear linguistic separation here between negative words and positive words. Question number 3, what's a word that connects the problem with the solution? What's a word that signals, thank you, Smita, but, yes, but shows there's a contrast between the problem and the solution. The whole text hinges on that little conjunction. Very, very important. Okay, so that's looking at one aspect of the text, its organization and its cohesion, if you like. What does this activity focus on? It's a gap fill, obviously, but what linguistic feature of the text is it focusing on? Let's see if you can, who's the first? Yes, absolutely. Prepositions. Why are there so many prepositions in this text, do you think? Well, obviously, because it's about travel, it's about places, and it's about time. Yeah? So all those things, direction, location, and time, are expressed in many languages through prepositions. And so that's a useful focus of this text. And there's lots of other things you could focus on in the text. I've just chosen 2. Its overall structure, including its cohesion, and also its prepositions. But there's a lot of other things there, if we had time, we could focus on. I just want to use this text to demonstrate this principle, that there are 2 ways of looking at a text in a classroom. One, as a vehicle of information. What's the text about? What's it telling us? Yeah, what's the information in it? That's how we look at texts in the real world. But in a classroom, we can also look at the text as a linguistic object. We can look at the language in the text. And there's a progression, a logical progression from going from text as a vehicle of information to text as a linguistic object. And that's the kind of progression that I want to demonstrate today. And we can break it down even further and think back to those layers of the onion I was talking about, and think of that at the first stage involves two kinds of reading. The text is a vehicle of information, two kinds of reading: the superficial reading, the outside of the onion, yeah, who, where, what, why, and then more intensive reading, those questions I gave you, the map, task, etc., which get at the next layer of the onion, the deeper meaning, the real meaning of the text. And then we can move on to using the text as a linguistic object, because we're in a classroom, we're in a language classroom, so why not use it as a linguistic object? Why not exploit its linguistic features? And that is an analytic reading, where I ask you to analyze the text according to a particular question or focus. So again, the progression in this kind of sequence is from a superficial or skim or gist reading, if you like, to a more intensive reading, to an analytic reading. Now, that's just the reading. We haven't talked about other ways of responding to the text through writing and speaking. So just to resume, we can then think of a text as a kind of onion with an outer layer, another layer, another layer, and an inner core. That's my principle, the principle I'm working at, unpacking a text. So let's look a little bit more slowly now at another text and apply that pedagogical sequence. Okay, so here is the text. Take your time, just read it, and then I'll start asking you some questions about it. Okay. So that's the text. Now, the questions. What is it? What kind of text is it? Is it a poem? Is it a story? Ifat thinks it's a poem. Looks like a poem. Okay. What about, where did I find this text? It's an authentic text. It's not from a textbook. So asking the same questions again: who from, who to, and finally, how, and finally, why. Yeah? So the same questions, but of course, it's not easy at the moment to answer the questions because you're missing some of the background information. If I show you the text, are you ready? If I show you the text, maybe it will help. Okay, so here's what the text looks like now in its original form. Are you any wiser as to what kind of text it is, or where I found it, or who it's to, or who it's from, or what its purpose is? Okay, I'm going to show you. I actually have it here. Are you ready? And that's not all the text. There's some other text that goes with it. I'm not sure if you can see that. So, what is it? Where did I find it? Who wrote it? Why? What's its purpose? It's a kind of pamphlet. Yes, it's a kind of, it's information. It's not to, Jazjeet, a charity. Absolutely, well spotted. So this arrived in my mailbox. Yeah, it's advertising a charity. That is to say, if you give £2 a month, you can buy a goat for a widow in Africa. Yeah, that's the idea. So if we go back to the text, if we can go back, we can see that it's telling a little story. Yeah, that's the how. It's a written story, if you like, or narrative. But its purpose is both to inform, and the overall purpose of the brochure, of course, is to ask, to ask for donations by presenting this story. So it's written from the people who run the charity to people who hopefully have a spare £2 to spend on the charity to buy a goat for a widow. So that's the outer layer of the onion. Yeah. Let's see how we can fit this text into a lesson sequence. So this is just one way I'm suggesting that you could use this text in class. Before they even read the text, ask the class, what's the most useful thing you could give to a widowed mother in an African village? You could give them a list to choose from. Yeah, they haven't read the text. This is before the text. The idea here is to generate interest in the topic, as well as to prepare them for some of the language in the text, like widowed, yeah, not a common word, but very important in this context. So what would you give a widowed mother? And they can discuss in groups, pairs or groups. What would be more useful? A bicycle, tractor, a husband? Okay, that's the first stage before they even read the text. Now, remember the onion? So the next question is going to be, when they read the text, is going to be, what kind of text is it? Yeah, very important. See if they can work out what kind of text, just as I asked you. So they're reading, they see there's some kind of narrative, but is it a poem? Is it a story? Is it a folk tale? Or is it something else? And this is where it would help if you can show them the original text or a picture of the original text, because all that non-linguistic information is very useful. Okay, that's the first outer layer of the onion. Yeah? Then more intensively, now we're going in for the comprehension, the understanding of the text, the details of the text. So read the text again and complete this diagram. Yeah? So which picture in which order? Okay, so it's very important that they understand the text, because it's no good to look at the language in the text until you're sure that they understand the text. And remember, reading the text aloud is not understanding the text. They need to answer questions or a task like this. Here are some more questions, going in a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. What does the mother get? What three things does the goat produce? What does she do with the milk? What is the manure good for? And what happens to the baby goats? Because these are the questions that get to the nitty-gritty, if you like, of the text. Very important and often skipped to the stage is the response to the text. Yeah? How do the learners respond to the text? What do you think of this idea? What do you think of this idea? I mean, don't you think it's a nice idea? You can give a woman a goat and the goat will produce more goats, and she gives one back and she keeps the goat. I think that's a lovely idea. So it's very important, I think, if you're using an authentic text, to ask the learners to think about how they respond to the text. Would they give money if they had it? This is particularly the case with literature, literary text, poems, stories, etc. What do you think of it? How do you respond? What's your initial impression? Did you like it, etc.? That's very important. It also tells you, as a teacher, how much they understood. Their response can be quite revealing. Okay, next stage. So we've looked at the text as a vehicle of information. Yeah, we've treated it as it is in real life, a vehicle of information. We've done the superficial reading, the who, why, what, where, when, and we've done some more intensive reading. Now What's the next stage? We're going to use it as a linguistic object. We're going to look at the language in the text. So, what do you think? What's in that text that might be worth focusing on? Remember, we looked at, in the other text, the Covent Garden text, we looked at prepositions. What do you like? What's anything here in this text that you think might be worth focusing on? Well, present tense, uvashi, rohini. Yeah, present tense is kind of interesting, but it's pretty common. And also here, the present tense is slightly unusually used because it's not talking about a daily activity. It's more about sort of facts. So I'm not sure. Teachers, when you ask teachers, you give them a text like this and you say, what would you focus on? 90% of teachers say the verbs. And verbs are important, but they're not the only thing in language. There's something much more interesting here than the present simple. There's something much more interesting, and you've already spotted it, some of you, and that is the articles. The articles. The articles. Look at that. A goat, the goat. The goat, a goat. Why does it go from a goat to the goat and then the goat to a goat? Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting? What does it tell you about the difference between the indefinite article and the definite article? What does it tell you? A goat, then the goat, a goat. And articles are one of the hardest things. They're the most common words in English, but one of the hardest things for many students to learn. Now, it's not about particular goat because the goat is the same goat, a goat, the goat. It's a particular goat. I'm not even sure if it's a specific goat. It's still, the goat, give a widowed mother a goat. It's a specific goat. The goat. What's the difference? What's the difference? A goat and the goat. It's not the first time because look at the end. The goat, a goat. We go from the to a. It's not. Okay, for me, the rule is basically new information, shared information. New information, a goat. It's a new goat. Then it becomes shared. It's the goat I just mentioned, yeah? The goat, and then a goat, the woman keeps a goat at the end is a new goat. Now, that's all. It's new versus shared. But isn't that interesting? It's such a wonderful text for demonstrating that. But here's another thing. Here's another thing. Look at this. What's the grammar here that I'm focusing on? Give a widowed mother a goat. Give a widowed mother a goat. What's interesting about this? It's not to do with the verbs. Well, it is partly, but it's not to do with tenses. A widowed mother, a goat. What's special about that sentence? How many objects in that sentence? How many objects? 2. Yes, 2 objects. Now, I'm not sure if in Tamil or Hindustani or Gujarati you have that same construction, 2 objects. Give a widowed mother a goat. Give a widowed mother 1 object, a goat, 2nd object. Can you do that in your language? I don't know. It's a very specific thing to some languages. There's no prepositions, there's no nothing. It's just 2 objects. Yeah, we call this kind of structure, the syntax, ditransitive. Di for 2, transitive for verbs that take objects. So give is a ditransitive verb. It takes 2 objects. And there's lots of others, of course. Tell a child a story. 2 objects. Yeah. Of course, we can rephrase that. Give a goat to a widowed mother with a prepositional phrase. But it's also equally valid to say give a widowed mother a goat. I think that's interesting, and it's something that learners have trouble with. That's part of the syntax of this text. Okay, but there's lots of other things we could look at here as well. But those are two things I think are interesting: the articles and the ditransitive construction in the first sentence. So let's go back to our lesson. How could we exploit that? Well, we could put on the board a grid, a table like that, and have the learners work together to fill in other words in the column 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, another adjective, another noun, and another noun phrase. Give a widowed mother a goat, give a hungry child some food, for example. And they can generate as many sentences as they can. You could also change the verb too, depending on the level of the students. So we're looking now at the text as a linguistic object, yeah? We've dealt with the information, we're looking at it as a linguistic object. And so we're focused on one particular feature here, which is the ditransitive construction. Now we want to work on that, to practice that. So let's generate some creativity here by giving students sentences using that structure and have them write a similar text to the goat text. Yeah, so we're moving from the reading stage to reproducing another text, a similar text themselves, a creative stage. So give a lonely person a cell phone, give an unemployed youth a bicycle, give a smart child a dictionary. Students working together choose one of those sentences and work together to write a similar text to the goat text, yeah? A similar text to this text, using that as the first line. And then let's move on now to, we haven't dealt with listening and speaking. So here's a possible follow-up as we move away from the text, but we're using the same idea of giving things. So you tell the students, listen to me, I'm going to tell you about something I was given that proved really useful. Yeah? Or maybe totally useless. Now, we've all been given something by somebody which was really useful, or we may have been given something by somebody which was totally useless. So you tell your story. Once, my sister gave me a stamp album for my birthday, but I didn't have any stamps to put in it. It was totally useless. You ask learners to think of similar stories and provide prompts on the board. So once someone gave me it, what I love, don't like it. Yeah, so you're giving them some language so they can tell their story about their useful or their useless gift. And then they can share these stories with the rest of the class. So this is just a suggestion of a way of following up on the original text. Of course, we don't leave the text behind. We're going to revisit it because one of the very important features of this lesson sequence is that you want to review and recycle the features of the text that you've been looking at. Yeah? So one way of doing that is in a follow-up lesson, or at the end of the lesson, is giving them a gap fill like this to see what they can remember. And they can work on this in pairs or small groups. It's not a test. It's a way of recycling the language in the text. And you can, having done that, the next lesson or a week later, give them an even more deconstructed text, yeah? See what they can remember. It's very important, I think. One of the problems, not a problem, but one of the casualties, if you like, of using texts in class is that students only see them once and then they seldom revisit them. But I think one of the benefits of a text is that you can go back to it again and again over increasing sequences of time. And this is one way, very easy way of doing that. Okay, so to sum up, this is my model for a text-based lesson, where we start off with the text as a vehicle of information. We think of it as an onion, and we take off the layers one by one. The superficial, the outer skin, if you like, and then using skimming techniques or superficial reading, and then more intensive reading to get the information out of the text, comprehension questions, for example, mapping the information onto some kind of diagram, matching the text with pictures, putting pictures in order, putting statements in order. Yeah. Notice that there's no room in there for reading the text aloud. I see not a lot of value of the students reading the text aloud, especially if they don't yet understand it. Reading a text aloud doesn't give you understanding of the text. Yeah? You need to read the text silently, answer questions about it, put pictures in order, choose the right picture. Those kinds of tasks are a much better indicator of comprehension, and not only an indicator of comprehension, but they are a guide to comprehension if they're sequenced in the right order from the outer layer to the inner layer. Having done that, the text is now ready to be analyzed as a linguistic object. So we can move into the analytic reading. The linguistic features of the text that you choose to look at will depend on the text, obviously, and also on the level of the learners, and of course on your own syllabus, exams, etc., which may impact on your decisions as to what to focus on. But very importantly, as teachers, we need to, I think, broaden our vision a little when we look at text and stop seeing only the verbs, only the tenses. Language is not just tenses. Language is syntax, like give a woman a goat, two objects, that's syntax. It's also nouns, noun phrases, including articles and adjectives. Very, very, very important, particularly at higher levels where learners are going to need to write more academic kind of texts. And every language organizes its sentences slightly differently and packages its nouns slightly differently. So don't just look at the tenses. There's more to English than the present simple or the past simple. Yeah. So have prepositions, for example, is another thing. So having decided what to select to focus on linguistically, then we can devise tasks that leads students to focus on that particular activity. They could be gap fill tasks. They could be reconstruction from memory tasks, and so on. And that is my model for a text-based approach. Of course, I haven't included in the diagram the post-text or the pre-text work. The pre-text, remember, asking, setting some kind of task before they read to get them interested, to generate their interest, to generate some of the vocabulary they may encounter in the text. And the post-text stage, where the students respond to the text and they create their own text using of a similar kind, if that's appropriate. Yeah. So there's not just reading, there's also writing, as a follow-on. And of course, also speaking and listening. Remember the activity about something I was given that was useful or useless. So within that lesson, that tiny text, this text of only about 25 words, the GOAT text, we've generated a lesson which included reading, writing, speaking, listening, and a focus on syntax and other features of grammar. Yeah? We haven't even mentioned vocabulary. So that one tiny text is able to generate a lot of different activities, a lot of different focuses, and possibly a whole 1 hour lesson. The principle being that of the onion. Yeah? Treat the text as an onion, start from the outside, work your way in, and when you've got to the middle, then you can enjoy the taste of the onion. Okay, so we got through that in record time. So I've got plenty of questions, time for questions and answers. So I'm going to close the PowerPoint, and I'm going to field questions that have been collected for me. I'm just opening.
It was a truly wonderful session, Mr. Thornbury. It was amazing how you made it seem so simple. With the new National Education Policy 2020, critical thinking and in-depth learning have become imperatives besides general engagement and enjoyment of reading. Your session will help teachers enable these principles in their English language teaching classrooms. May I now request Kavya Sharma to anchor the discussion and relay the questions from the participants?
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Priya. And thank you, Mr. Thornbury, for that amazing, enlightening session. I think all the teachers and educators who've joined us today will agree that exploiting a layered text is no mean task, even though you made it look very simple. The tips and techniques that you've shared will go a long way in easing their discomfort. So we have a lot of questions, so let's go straight to them. Urvashi Unyal and Ramesh Thornbury, they've both asked similar questions. So in a 40-minute class, what should be the ratio of time do you think a teacher should devote teaching the text, asking comprehension-based questions, and linguistic exercises?
That's an excellent question. And obviously, it's going to depend on lots of factors, including the length of the text, for a start. One of the things I wanted to focus on in this session was how short texts can be exploited for in lots of different ways. Now, the longer the text, the more time it takes to process, the bigger the onion, yeah? And a very long text is going to take a lot of classroom time before the students are even at the stage where they're ready to focus on it as a linguistic object. So that's why I like short texts. The short texts, you can focus on the outer layer and the inner layers relatively quickly. That gives you lots of time for these other activities that focus on the language, but also the follow-up speaking and writing, etc. activities. So from my point of view, the shorter the text, the better in many ways. Of course, it's important also that students learn to process long texts, and particularly at higher levels, and particularly those who are going on to university studies or whatever, who will need to read, 20-page articles or 500-page books. So long texts, yes, they need to practice, but those may be best dealt with outside the classroom. To do the extensive reading, longer text outside the classroom, but bringing the knowledge that they've gained from those texts back to the classroom so that they can talk about the text. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, create more space in the real classroom by using shorter texts, but using them for a variety of different ways, and reserving longer texts for out of classroom work. Now, of course, that assumes that the students are going to read the text outside the class. And that's a discipline that we have to kind of inculcate in them. And one way to encourage them to read outside the class is, first of all, if possible, to let them choose what they want to read. So if it's stories, let them choose the stories, maybe from a selection that they want to read. Yeah. Or find text on the internet, for example, that they want to read about subjects that they're interested in. And then they read the text, they come back to the class and tell the rest of the class about the text. What did you read? What did you find out? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it interesting? Was it funny, etc.? Yeah. So, this is a long answer to a very good question. But I would say, reading a lesson, if it's all spent 90% reading, is a kind of waste of really valuable time. Classrooms are great places for speaking and listening, and they don't get that opportunity outside the classroom very much. So the longer we can spend on speaking and listening in the classroom, which means spending less time on reading and writing, the better. Now, I'm not saying don't do reading in class. I'm not saying don't do writing in class. Of course, we need to do both, because writing particularly is aided and assisted when there is a teacher present or when students can work collaboratively. But I think the question is also very interesting at the moment because of many of us are now teaching online because of the pandemic, which has in a sense created a new set of choices about how we distribute the time. And I think, again, we're realizing that a lot of work can be done outside of class time with students doing their reading and writing particularly, and their grammar exercises and all that kind of more mechanical stuff, doing it outside of class time, reserving classroom time for the really communicative, interactive kind of activities. But that's a really good question.
Right, right. There's a lot of concern about completing the syllabus on time, especially with the reduced hours now. So I think you've addressed that. Okay, so on to our next question. This is from Ms. Vandana Pandey. We often ask our students to underline the unknown words in a reading text and look for their meanings in the dictionary. What are your thoughts on this approach?
Yeah, but this is something I omitted in my presentation, and I'm very glad you asked that. Is how do you deal with unfamiliar vocabulary? And there's lots of different ways that we do this traditionally. The traditional way is often that the teacher will pre-select vocabulary that is likely to be unfamiliar to the learners and or is critical for the understanding of the text, and pre-teach the vocabulary in advance of reading the text. So in a sense, that's a little bit like treating the text as a linguistic object before we even get into it as a vehicle of information. We're going to look at the words in the text, and we're going to, because it is important we now know, research tells us that learners will have trouble with a text if more than 95%, if 5 in every 100 words is unusual for them or unfamiliar. Yeah, they need to understand at least 95% of the words of the text to read the text comfortably, which is actually a lot of the text. Now, pre-teaching the words, as I said, is one option, although the research into pre-teaching isn't very encouraging. You pre-teach the words and the students don't actually remember what the words mean when they find them in the text. So the idea, yes, of underlining the words that they don't understand and using the dictionaries, I think is a perfectly valid one. And of course, if they're reading online, now there's a lot of different tools whereby they can just click on the word and be taken instantly to a dictionary and get a translation or a definition in the target language. And that makes the reading process a lot easier. Of course, the dictionary can't predict what the exact meaning of that word is in that text. That's one of the problems. But it is important to deal with the vocabulary. One of the activities I like to do in a real classroom is have the learners choose, say, 3 or 4 words that they want to know the meaning of, in the text. And then, before they use the dictionaries, they compare with their partner or in small groups. And they have to share their words and come up with a new list of, let's say, 5 words that they agree they think they would like, because then they can teach each other the words that the others don't know necessarily. So a little bit of collaboration there. And then maybe even bigger groups until you get the whole class. Okay, what are the five words that you really, really need to know that you can't work out from the context or that nobody else in the class knows? And those are the words you're allowed to look up. So we want to reduce learners' dependency on looking up every word that's unfamiliar, and have them work collaboratively or have them using context clues to try and work out the meanings. It's not always possible, but we need to develop these kinds of strategies to deal with unfamiliar vocabulary. And it also comes back to the choice of text. Choose for fluent reading, choose text which you could be sure that the students know most of the words. But if they if they're not likely to know most of the words, then you need to work out, yes, exactly. Shall I pre-teach the words, or shall I let them look up the words as they read? And my feeling might be is to use the during reading approach rather than the pre-reading approach on the basis of the research evidence.
Right.
But it's a good question.
Right. So I think it's related to the same question, but if you want to expand upon it, it's by Shrinka Sen Gupta. She says, how can we facilitate children to delve into the layers of a text on their own now that they're reading on their own during online classes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think whether children or adults, the question is the same. How do we develop these strategies when students are reading on their own? I think reading for comprehension, for understanding, it's possible for learners working on their own without too much support, assuming that the text's not too difficult. Because they can use online means to look up the words or even get a translation of the text if it comes to that. Using the text as a linguistic object really does require support and specially designed tasks which help the learners focus on those particular features of the language. Not something that learners are very good at doing themselves necessarily, although I think we can train learners to become what I call text detectives. Yeah, a detective of a text is somebody who knows how to look at a text and say, well, that's an interesting phrase, that's an interesting expression, or that's an interesting structure. I wonder what it is. Let's have a look in the grammar book and see what it is, etc. But not all learners have that aptitude. So they need to be either trained or they need to be helped with the kinds of tasks that I've just outlined, whereby they can, I mean, I tell you, one useful technique for learners to get them to appreciate the linguistic features of a text is using translation. So this is working on their own, yeah? So they have the text, let's say it's a text like the goat text in English. They read the text, they check the meaning of the words, everything, so they understand it perfectly, and they translate it into their mother tongue, yeah? Whether it's Tamil or Gujarati or whatever. And then they put the original text aside and they try to translate the text back into English, yeah? And that creates all sorts of challenges and problems. They can't remember what was exact, how did I express that, etc. So they translate it back into English and then they compare it with the original. And that process is really, really, really good at developing text analytic skills and also developing language proficiency at a whole range of different levels, the vocabulary, the grammar, and the overall textual features of the text, its discourse markers and so on. So that's one possibility, but I mean, not all, it takes time, it's not that easy, and it's something that not all learners will necessarily do, but it's something that we can demonstrate in the classroom at least and encourage them to do, and try to convey the fact that this is really, really, really good way of practicing.
Absolutely. This is so relevant to Indian classrooms, especially because their native language is usually the way they learn English. So next question is from Aprajit Yadav. Sometimes during a pre-text activity, we need to tell the entire story. Is it a good idea to keep the story to ourselves, to build it up a little, or give the crux of the story away?
Well, I mean, it depends what kind of text it is again, and also the level. I think, yeah, there is an advantage in learners. If the text is remotely difficult, then giving them a kind of summary in advance so that they can make sense. My feeling is to do this in another medium, ideally. So in other words, they see maybe a little movie clip, a video clip of the story, if it's possible. So if it's, or if nothing else, a sequence of pictures, so that we don't want to do too much work for them. The idea that the story should be completely comprehensible, or the text should be completely comprehensible even before they start, is going to discourage them from doing that little bit of hard work, paying attention, working a little bit harder with the text than they would normally. And just to, refer here to the work of Stephen Krashen. Some of you may be familiar with Krashen's theory of language acquisition, which argues that you learn a language by understanding input, what he called comprehensible input. But the input needs to be slightly beyond the current level of the learner. Now, difficult to assess, but it sort of makes sense that if you're being pushed a little, you understand 95%, but you're being pushed a little to understand that last 5%, then that's good for you. It's good for you. You need to be pushed a little, challenged when you're learning a second language. So if you do all the work for the students beforehand, you may be depriving them of that little bit of push, that what Krashen calls the input +1, the +1. If it's +0, then there's not, where's the push? But if it's a +100, then it's too much push. So we need to calibrate quite carefully how much difficulty we want for the learners to face, and to give them all the help that they need when they're reading the text to deal with those difficulties, not do too much of the work for them. So it's an interesting question. As I say, my tendency is to withhold all the information, keep back some of the story at least, so that they have to do some of the work themselves.
Right. Okay, this is an interesting one. Which is more important in reading skill development, grammar or vocabulary?
Vocabulary. Vocabulary. You can get most of the sense of a text if you know the words in the text. You don't actually need to focus that much on the grammatical differences between the present simple and the present continuous. Those differences are often not critical for your overall understanding of the text. But if you don't understand the words in the text, or if you only understand half the words in the text, there's no way you're going to understand the words in the text. So anything that you have access to as a teacher, which gives an indication of the vocabulary difficulty of a text, there's lots of tools around on the internet that measure text difficulty. Mainly, they're for learners learning English as their first language. For children learning English in school, the measures of text difficulty, and they tell you how difficult this text is according to the length of the words, the length of the sentences, things like that. But there are other tools available that tell you, if you're teaching English as a second language, can give you much more useful information about, for example, the frequency of the words, the familiarity of the words, how common the words are in a text. One of my favorite tools is the lexical tutor, lextutor.ca. LexTutor, one word, LEXTUTOR.ca. It's a wonderful set of tools that have been devised by linguists in Canada. And you can put a text into the window of that website, and it'll show you, will color code all the words in the text according to their frequency. So you can tell instantly how likely it is that the learners of a certain level will understand the text, because the more frequent the words in the text, more common the words, the more likely, it's not a guarantee, but the more likely they are to understand the text. If they understand, as I said before, say 90% of the words in the text are in the top 1,000 words in English, then there's a good chance they'll understand the text. That's how we write text for children in the first language. We choose common words. And common words make a text much more easy to understand.
Right. Thank you for sharing that useful resource. I'm sure all the teachers have noted that down. So this is our last question for the day. This is from Ramesh Thambare. What kind of activities need to be conducted for slow learners to aid linguistic understanding of the text?
Well, it's a difficult question. If you've got a wide diversity of levels in the class, then there's various options. One is that you have different versions of the text, an easy version and a more difficult version. But that's unless those versions that have been supplied to you, it's quite a lot of work for the teacher to write different versions of the text. Nevertheless, that might be an option. And using that tool I just mentioned, lexical tutor, you have got a window where you can change the words in the text to make them more common. So you could create relatively easily, using that tool, you could create easier versions of the text. The other way is just to do it collaboratively, to put the readers, the weaker readers with the strong readers, not all the time, but for certain activities, and have the stronger readers help the weaker readers answer the questions about the text. If the weaker readers really are having problems decoding text, one technique which is used in first language literacy is where the stronger reader supervises the weaker reader reading the text aloud. And this does seem to be a case for reading aloud, where the weaker reader reads the text aloud. Where they have problems, the stronger reader helps them out, explains, if they can't pronounce a word, etc. That is more working at the level of processing a familiar text, a text that they've, a story that they know well. They know the story. It's maybe a folk tale or a fairy story or whatever, but now they're reading it for the first time and reading aloud to a better reader who's helping them. Oh no, that's not element, that's elephant. They can help them process the relationship between the written form and the spoken form. And then again, another way is you use the same text with the class, but you ask different questions about it to the weaker students. So you don't ask those really, really, really difficult questions. You just go for the more superficial questions. That's another strategy.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Thornbury. That was a very informative, very enjoyable session. Over to Priya.
Thank you, Kavya. And thanks again, Mr. Thornbury. I'm sure the insights and strategies you shared today in your talk and in the question answer session will empower and enrich our teachers of English in their online classes in these challenging times of pandemic and change. We are so pleased to be able to tell our participants today that you will be back for more interactions with teachers in India on Orient BlackSwan ONE. I would also like to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. We'd love to hear from you. Please do share your feedback with us. Good day from all of us at Orient BlackSwan.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Kavya. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.